All right, let's dive into one of history's sharpest and maybe most surprising thinkers. So picture this, a guy who wasn't even Greek, but the ancient Greeks themselves called him a sage. He was what they called a barbarian, yet he saw the cracks in their so-called civilization way more clearly than they ever could. His name? Anacharsis.
I mean, just let that one sink in for a second. This is probably his most famous quote, and man, does it perfectly capture what he was all about. We're talking over 2.5 millennia ago, and he's just laying out this brutal, unflinching truth about power and justice. And the craziest part? It feels like it could have been written yesterday. So, who was this guy?
And this right here, this is the central puzzle of Anacharsis, isn't it? To the Greeks, his people, the Scythians, were, barbarians, uncivilized. And yet, they were completely fascinated by his wisdom. He was the ultimate outsider, and it was because he was an outsider that he could see the Greeks more clearly than they could ever see themselves.
Yeah, Anacharsis came from a world that was just completely wildly different from Athens. I mean, he was royalty from these nomadic tribes on the Scythian steppes. So his journey wasn't just about covering distance on a map, it was a total collision of cultures. And that's what's so key. This unique spot he was in, as a respected foreigner, gave him a point of view that no Greek could possibly have.
So this journey, it's really the heart of his story. Just try to imagine it. You leave this world that's completely soaked in ancient tradition, and you walk into another one that's just buzzing with these radical new ideas like democracy and philosophy. He shows up with the eyes of someone who takes absolutely nothing for granted. He questioned everything.
And wow, the contrast is just staggering. Think about going from the huge open steppes of Scythia, this land of nomads and deep-rooted tradition, and landing smack in the middle of the noisy, argumentative cities of Greece. You've got people debating this brand new experiment called democracy on every street corner. That culture shock? That's exactly where his incredible insight came from.
And he definitely didn't just arrive quietly, blend into the background. Nope. Legend says he became friends with the famous Athenian lawgiver, Solon. And his brand of wisdom, it wasn't polite, it wasn't abstract, it was blunt, it was practical. And yeah, it was probably pretty uncomfortable for the people he was talking to. He just wasn't afraid to point out all the hypocrisies he saw everywhere he looked.
Okay, so this gets us to the very heart of his legacy. Anacharsis had what you might call the ultimate outsider's advantage. Right? Because he wasn't brought up with all the Greek customs and unspoken rules, he could see all the stuff that was just plain absurd, all the illusions they were living under with crystal clear vision.
So, what was his philosophy really? Well, it wasn't some big, complicated system. It was more like a collection of really powerful, straight-to-the-point insights about how to live a good life. He was all about simplicity over luxury. He valued strength and being tough over just being comfortable. He was constantly calling out injustice whenever he spotted it. And most of all, he focused on practical wisdom, stuff you could actually use, not just debate about forever.
While all the Athenians were running around chasing money and status, Anacharsis just saw it as a big trap. For him, true freedom wasn't about having more stuff. It was about needing less stuff. Now that's a powerful idea, and it flew right in the face of the city's whole materialistic vibe.
And he didn't just stop with their social habits, oh no. He turned that super sharp critical eye of his onto their proudest invention, democracy itself. And what did he see? Well, he noticed something, a weird contradiction that a lot of the Greeks themselves just seemed to be missing entirely.
Man, what a zinger. It's just such a devastatingly sharp critique, right? He looked around and saw all these experts and philosophers arguing back and forth, endlessly debating. But the final say, the real power to decide things, that was in the hands of people who, didn't really know what they were talking about. It makes you ask that timeless question, who's really in charge here?
And really, that's what he was all about. Anacharsis had zero interest in, debating abstract, pointless questions. His philosophy was totally grounded in real life. He was asking the big, practical questions. How should we live? What makes someone a good person? How can we see the world as it actually is? This was wisdom for living, not for sitting around in a classroom.
But his story takes a really dark turn here, because bringing new ideas into a world that's stuck in its old ways, that can come with a terrible price. And for Anacharsis, challenging tradition would end up costing him everything.
So according to the historian Herodotus, what happened was this. Anacharsis goes back home to Scythia, and he tries to introduce some of the Greek customs he'd picked up on his travels. Well, his own people, they saw this as a total betrayal. And the story goes that his own brother, the king, had him executed for turning his back on their traditions.
So his tragic end really becomes this powerful symbol. Here's a guy who was caught between two worlds, right? He wasn't really Scythian anymore, but he was never going to be truly Greek either. His whole life story is kind of a timeless warning about how dangerous new ideas can be and just how powerful and sometimes violent the pull of tradition really is.
So why are we talking about some Scythian prince from 2,500 years ago? Well, because the questions he was asking and the hypocrisies he was pointing out, they are just as raw and relevant today as they were back in ancient Athens.
I mean, really think about it for a second. Does power still corrupt? Do our laws really apply equally to everybody? Do we as a society sometimes value the loudest opinion over actual quiet wisdom? His questions are just as sharp, just as piercing today as they were back then.
You can see the echoes of his critiques literally everywhere. I mean, when he talks about laws that favor the rich, doesn't that sound exactly like our debates today about tax loopholes and inequality in the justice system? And his warning about fools deciding, that feels incredibly urgent when you think about all the concerns over misinformation and political polarization. And his whole skepticism of luxury, that's alive and well in every single discussion about consumerism and minimalist living.
So, what are the big takeaways from his life? What can we learn from Anacharsis? First, that wisdom can, and often does, come from the most unexpected places. Second, that an outsider's perspective is incredibly powerful and offers a unique kind of clarity. And finally, that questioning the way things are, questioning power, isn't just some academic game. It's the real path to finding justice and truth.
And that really leaves us with one last big question to chew on. Anacharsis was the barbarian philosopher of his day. So it kind of makes you wonder, right? Who are the outsiders today? Who are the people on the fringes of our own society? The immigrants, the artists, the critics, the people who just don't quite fit into the system. What are they seeing about us that the rest of us can't?